There is a conversation about you that your soulmate may never have told you about. And if you ever wondered why their attitude suddenly changed, this story might make you look at those moments differently. Because sometimes a person doesn't walk away after losing feelings. Sometimes they step back because something they heard changed the way they understood a situation. Imagine this. Someone you care about starts hearing comments about you from a person they trust. Nothing sounds serious at first. A passing remark. A little warning. A question that seems harmless. But those small comments begin staying in their mind. Are you sure they feel the same way? Maybe you're reading too much into it. Have you noticed how distant they've become? None of those statements proves anything. But when someone already has doubts, even an innocent sentence can make them start looking at ordinary moments differently. That may be what happened to your soulmate in this story. They didn't suddenly decide that you were a bad person. They became uncertain. And uncertainty can be powerful. A late reply started feeling significant. A quiet day seemed like a sign. Seeing you enjoying your life made them wonder whether you had already moved forward without them. Instead of asking you, they kept those thoughts inside. Then someone else offered an explanation. That explanation wasn't necessarily true. But it sounded convincing enough to someone who was already afraid. Slowly, your soulmate began creating a picture of you from information that didn't come directly from you. And you may have felt the effect without knowing the reason. Perhaps their messages became shorter. Maybe conversations that once felt effortless became awkward. There were moments when they seemed interested, then suddenly distant. You might have blamed yourself. You might have wondered whether something had changed between you. But in this story, the real problem wasn't one dramatic event. It was a misunderstanding that kept growing because nobody stopped to question it. Your soulmate still had feelings. That was obvious from the way they continued thinking about you. They remembered old conversations. They noticed when you disappeared. They wondered what you were doing. They sometimes opened your messages without knowing what to say. But every time they considered reaching out, another thought stopped them. What if I'm wrong about them? What if they don't feel the same? What if I've already waited too long? Those questions became louder than their courage. And the person giving them advice seemed to have an answer for everything. That's where things became complicated. Because good advice should help someone communicate. It shouldn't make them afraid to communicate. One evening, your name came up again. Your soulmate was listening quietly until something finally felt different. The person speaking about you made a claim that didn't match what your soulmate remembered. They looked up. Where did you hear that? The answer wasn't immediate. There was a hesitation. Just long enough for your soulmate to notice. They asked again. Who told you? This time, a name was given. And it wasn't a stranger. It was someone your soulmate trusted. Someone who had been close enough to hear private conversations. Someone whose opinion carried weight. Your soulmate didn't argue. They simply started remembering. How often had this person mentioned you? How many times had they warned your soulmate to stay away? Why did those warnings seem to appear whenever the two of you became closer? Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe there was another explanation. But your soulmate suddenly wanted to know for sure. That night, they opened your old messages. They weren't looking for evidence against you. They were looking for context. And the more they read, the more uncomfortable they became. Your actual words didn't match the picture they had been given. The person they remembered wasn't the person described in those conversations. Then they found one message that stopped them. It was something you had once said during an honest conversation. If you ever want to know what I feel, ask me. Your soulmate stared at it. They realized they had spent so much time trying to understand you from a distance that they had forgotten the simplest option. They could have asked. They could have listened. They could have given you the opportunity to explain. Instead, they had allowed uncertainty to make the decision. Your soulmate put the phone down. Then picked it up again. They opened your name. Typed a message. Deleted it. Tried another. Deleted that one too. They didn't know how to explain everything without admitting that they had doubted you. Eventually, they wrote 4 words. Can we talk honestly? They looked at the message. For a moment, they almost changed their mind. Then they sent it. The message was delivered. And now the person who had spent all this time wondering about you had to face something they had been avoiding. They needed to hear your side. Not someone else's interpretation. Not another warning. Not another rumor. Your side. Minutes passed. Then your reply appeared. Your soulmate opened it. And what you wrote wasn't an accusation. It was something much more unsettling. I know someone has been talking about me. Your soulmate froze. Because you already knew something was happening. You simply didn't know who. And suddenly, the conversation was no longer about whether the rumors existed. It was about how much damage they had already caused. Your soulmate stared at the screen. They knew there was only one honest thing left to do. Tell you everything. But before they could type the name, they remembered one detail from the past. A detail that could completely change what you both thought had happened. And that was the detail they were about to uncover. Your soulmate stared at the last message for a long time. There was something they had forgotten. Not a huge event. Not some dramatic confrontation. A small detail from months earlier. But now that they were looking at everything differently, that memory suddenly felt important. They remembered a conversation with the same person who had been warning them about you. At the time, it had seemed like ordinary advice. Now they wondered whether there had been another reason behind it. Your soulmate searched through their old messages. They scrolled past birthdays, casual conversations, forgotten jokes, and old plans. Then they found it. A message sent shortly after you and your soulmate had shared one of your most meaningful conversations. The timing was almost too perfect. The message said, "Be careful about getting too attached." Your soulmate remembered reading it. They had brushed it aside. But now another memory surfaced. That same day, the person had asked whether you and your soulmate were becoming serious. Back then, the question hadn't seemed strange. Now it did. Why were they so interested? Why did they always seem to know when something was changing between you? Your soulmate kept scrolling. Another message appeared. You don't really know what they want. Then another. Maybe you should slow down. None of these sentences proved that anyone had intentionally tried to interfere. But together, they raised a question your soulmate couldn't ignore. Was this really concern? Or had someone been projecting their own fears onto the situation? Your soulmate decided not to guess. They called the person. The first call went unanswered. So did the second. A few minutes later, a message appeared. Why are you looking through old conversations? Your soulmate froze. They hadn't mentioned what they were doing. They typed, "Because I want to understand what happened." The response came quickly. You're making this bigger than it is. Your soulmate stared at the screen. Maybe they were. Maybe there was another explanation. But there was only one way to find out. They asked, "Did you ever tell me something about them that you weren't sure was true?" No answer. The silence continued. Then the person finally wrote, "I was trying to protect you." Your soulmate replied, "From what?" Again, silence. Eventually, "You don't know everything." That sentence stayed on the screen. Your soulmate read it several times. Then asked, "Then tell me." The answer didn't come. Instead, the person called. Your soulmate answered. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the voice on the other end said something unexpected. I never wanted you to hate them. Your soulmate frowned. Then why did you keep warning me? I thought you were getting too attached. That's my choice. I know. Then why interfere? There was a long silence. Finally, the person admitted something. They had been afraid. Not necessarily of you. Of losing your soulmate. They had developed feelings of their own. Feelings they hadn't known how to handle. And watching your soulmate become emotionally close to someone else had brought those feelings to the surface. Your soulmate felt disappointed. Not because someone had feelings. People can't always control what they feel. The problem was what they had done with those feelings. Instead of being honest, they had tried to influence the situation. Your soulmate said, "You should have told me the truth." The response was quiet. "I was scared you wouldn't choose me." That sentence explained more than every rumor combined. Your soulmate finally understood the real source of the tension. It wasn't proof that you had done something wrong. It was someone else's fear of being left behind. But there was still something missing. Your soulmate remembered the screenshot they had received from the unknown number. The person who sent it had said, "You deserve to know what really happened." Why would a stranger send that? Who were they? And how did they have access to those messages? Your soulmate asked the person on the phone. "Did you send something to me?" "No." "Then who did?" "I don't know." The answer sounded genuine. For the first time, your soulmate realized the situation might involve more people than they thought. They ended the call. Then they looked at the unknown number again. The screenshot was still there. They opened it. Read the message. And noticed something they had missed before. At the bottom of the screenshot was a date. A very old date. Older than the rumors. Older than the first warning. Older than the moment your soulmate had started pulling away from you. That changed everything. Because if the conversation had existed that long ago, then the story had begun before your soulmate even realized there was a story. They wanted to contact the number. Before they could, another message arrived. Don't ask them about it yet. Your soulmate stared at the screen. Who is this? No response. They sent another message. How do you know about this? Still nothing. Then, several minutes later, one final message appeared. Because I was there. Your soulmate's heart dropped. Someone had witnessed what happened. Someone knew the truth from the beginning. And now they were offering to explain it. But there was a condition. They wanted your soulmate to meet them in person. Your soulmate hesitated. This was no longer something they could casually dismiss. They agreed to meet. The following day, they arrived at the location. They waited. A few minutes later, someone approached. Your soulmate recognized them immediately. It was someone connected to the situation. Someone they had seen before. Someone they never imagined would know anything about the rumors. The person sat down. Looked directly at your soulmate. And said, "I've been waiting for you to find out." Your soulmate asked, "Find out what?" The person took out their phone. Opened an old conversation. Then turned the screen around. Your name appeared again. But this time, the message was different. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't an accusation. It was something you had said months earlier. Something that completely changed the meaning of everything your soulmate had been told. They read the message. Then looked up. Why didn't anyone show me this before? The person answered, because someone didn't want you to see it. Your soulmate felt a chill run through them. They asked, who? The person didn't answer immediately. Instead, they said, before I tell you, there's something else you need to understand. They explained that the conversation had been taken out of context. The words your soulmate had been told were real. But the meaning had been changed. Your soulmate suddenly understood why the rumors had sounded believable. They weren't entirely invented. They were fragments. Pieces removed from the larger picture. And the full picture told a completely different story. Your soulmate asked to see the entire conversation. The person hesitated. Then handed over the phone. Your soulmate began reading. And within seconds, their expression changed. Because the complete conversation showed something they had never known. You had actually been trying to protect them. You had been worried that your soulmate was being influenced by people around them. You had even said that you didn't want to create pressure. You wanted them to make their own decision. Your soulmate whispered, "They made it sound like I wasn't important to them." The person nodded. "That's not what you said." Your soulmate looked back at the screen. There it was. Your actual message. Your actual words. No interpretation. No rumor. No second-hand explanation. Just the truth. And suddenly, your soulmate realized something painful. They had been waiting for proof that you cared. The proof had been there all along. They simply hadn't seen it. Then the person sitting across from them said, "There's one more message." Your soulmate looked up. "What message?" The person opened another conversation. This one was between the person spreading the rumors and someone else. Your soulmate read the first few lines. Then stopped. Because the final message contained the reason everything had started. And once your soulmate read that sentence, they finally understood why someone had been so determined to keep the two of you apart. Your soulmate looked at the final message. For a moment, they couldn't understand what they were reading. Then they read it again. And this time, the meaning was clear. The person spreading the rumors had been afraid of one thing. Losing your soulmate to you. That was the motive. Not some secret betrayal. Not proof that you had done something terrible. Fear. Jealousy. Insecurity. And a desperate attempt to control a situation that was never theirs to control. Your soulmate leaned back. Everything suddenly felt different. They remembered the first warning. Then the second. Then all the conversations that followed. It had seemed like different pieces of advice from different moments. Now they could see the pattern. Whenever their feelings for you became stronger, another doubt appeared. Whenever they started thinking about getting closer, somebody reminded them of a reason to hesitate. Whenever they felt ready to trust you, another question entered their mind. Your soulmate finally whispered, "I let someone else decide what I thought about them." The person sitting across from them nodded. "But you can still change that." Those words stayed with your soulmate. Because they were right. The past couldn't be rewritten. But the next decision could be different. Your soulmate opened your conversation again. This time, they weren't looking for reassurance. They weren't trying to prove anything. They simply wanted to be honest. They typed, "I know more now." You replied, "About what?" Your soulmate paused. Then, "About what happened between us." You asked what they meant. They told you there had been conversations about you. They explained that some of the things they had heard weren't completely invented. Certain details had come from real situations. But the meaning had been changed. Context had been removed. Your words had been interpreted by someone who already had their own feelings involved. You read everything. Then asked, "So you believed them?" Your soulmate didn't avoid the question. Yes. There was no excuse attached. No attempt to make the answer sound better. Just honesty. You were quiet. Your soulmate continued. "I wish I had come to you first." Another message followed. "I was afraid of hearing something I couldn't handle. Then, so I listened to someone who sounded certain." That confession changed the conversation. Because certainty can be persuasive. Someone speaking confidently can make doubt feel like fact. But confidence isn't proof. Your soulmate finally understood that. They had confused somebody else's certainty with truth. And you had paid the price for it. Your soulmate apologized. Not once. Not dramatically. They explained exactly what they regretted. They regretted the assumptions. The distance. The unanswered questions. The moments when they could have talked to you but chose silence. Most importantly, they regretted making you carry confusion you didn't create. You asked, "Why didn't you trust me?" Your soulmate took a long time before answering. "Because I was scared." You asked, "Of me?" "No." "Then, of losing you." That answer changed everything. Because beneath all the rumors was a fear neither of you had talked about. Your soulmate had been afraid that they cared more. Afraid that you had already moved forward. Afraid that if they reached out, they would discover that the connection mattered only to them. Someone noticed that vulnerability. And instead of encouraging honest communication, they used it to create more uncertainty. Your soulmate could finally see the difference. They weren't protecting themselves from you. They were protecting themselves from a possibility they had imagined. And in doing so, they had almost created the outcome they feared. You asked another question. "Do you still think the things they told you were true?" Your soulmate answered immediately. "No." Then they added, "I don't know how much of what I believed was ever mine." That sentence made the conversation quiet. Because sometimes a person can carry an opinion for so long that they forget where it came from. They assume it belongs to them. Until one day they trace it back. And realize it started with somebody else. Your soulmate had reached that moment. They wanted to tell you everything. But there was still something they hadn't shared. The final message. The one that explained why the rumors had continued for so long. Your soulmate finally showed it to you. You read it. And your reaction was different from what they expected. You weren't shocked. You were hurt. Because the message confirmed something you had suspected for a long time. Someone had been afraid of what might happen if the two of you became close again. You told your soulmate, "I felt that." They asked, "What do you mean?" You explained that there had been moments when you sensed interference. You couldn't prove anything. So you didn't make accusations. You simply stepped back. Your soulmate listened carefully. Then they realized something painful. Both of you had been stepping away at the same time. You thought they wanted distance. They thought you wanted distance. Neither of you understood that the silence was being fueled by the same misunderstanding. Your soulmate laughed softly. Not because the situation was funny. Because it was almost unbelievable. "So we both thought the other person was leaving." You replied, "Looks like it." That simple exchange broke some of the tension. For the first time, the two of you weren't trying to defend yourselves. You were looking at the situation together. And that changed the conversation. Your soulmate asked what you wanted now. You didn't give them a dramatic answer. You didn't promise anything. You simply said, "I want honesty." Your soulmate nodded. Then that's what you'll get. They didn't promise perfection. They promised communication. If something felt wrong, they would ask. If someone said something about you, they would come to you. If they felt afraid, they would admit it instead of disappearing. That was the beginning of rebuilding trust. Not a magical moment. Not an instant transformation. Just two people finally choosing direct communication over assumptions. But there was still one person left to deal with. The person who had started the rumors. Your soulmate met them one final time. There was no shouting. No attempt to embarrass them. Your soulmate simply asked, "Did you ever believe what you were telling me?" The person looked away. After a long silence, they admitted something. Not completely. Your soulmate stared at them. Then why say it? The answer was painful. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd choose them. Your soulmate shook their head. You could have told me how you felt. I didn't know how. You knew how to talk about them. That sentence ended the argument. Because it was true. The person had found the courage to interfere. They simply hadn't found the courage to be honest. Your soulmate walked away knowing they couldn't change that person's choices. But they could change their own. And that was exactly what they intended to do. Later that night, your soulmate called you again. They told you what had happened. Then they said, I don't want someone else's fear deciding what happens between us. You stayed quiet. Your soulmate continued. I don't know what the future looks like. That honesty mattered. But I know I don't want to keep running from something because somebody else told me to. There was a long silence. Then you said, that's all I needed to hear. Your soulmate closed their eyes. For the first time in months, the weight they had been carrying began to lift. But there was still one final truth they hadn't admitted. Not to you. Not to themselves. The reason the rumors had affected them so deeply wasn't only because they trusted the wrong person. It was because part of them had already been afraid that you were too important. And when someone matters that much, losing them can feel frightening even before they are gone. Your soulmate finally understood that. They weren't scared because they felt nothing. They were scared because they felt something they couldn't easily control. And now they had a choice. Let that fear keep controlling them, or finally face it. They chose to face it. And what they said next would reveal the one feeling they had been hiding from you since the beginning. Your soulmate finally admitted the thing they had been afraid to say. I didn't pull away because I stopped caring. You stayed quiet. They continued. I pulled away because I cared, and I didn't know what to do with that. For a moment, neither of you spoke. Then your soulmate explained what had really been happening inside them. Every time they felt closer to you, the possibility of losing you became more frightening. They started imagining the worst. Maybe you would change your mind. Maybe someone else would come along. Maybe they would become attached while you remained uncertain. Those fears existed before anyone ever spoke about you. The rumors didn't create the insecurity. They simply gave it a voice. And once your soulmate began hearing those warnings, their doubts felt justified. That was the part they regretted most. They had mistaken fear for intuition. They had treated assumptions like evidence. They had allowed another person's interpretation to influence their view of someone they should have spoken to directly. Your soulmate looked at you and said, should have asked you. You nodded. Yes. There was no dramatic argument. No attempt to erase what happened. Just honesty. And somehow, that made the moment more meaningful. Your soulmate wasn't asking you to forget everything. They weren't demanding immediate trust. They understood that trust doesn't return simply because someone finally tells the truth. It has to be rebuilt. Slowly. Through actions. Through consistency. Through conversations that don't disappear when things become uncomfortable. So your soulmate made a simple decision. They would stop trying to control the outcome. If you wanted distance, they would respect it. If you wanted to talk, they would listen. If something worried them, they would ask instead of assuming. And if someone brought another story about you, they would remember what this experience had taught them. Go to the source. Don't build a conclusion from somebody else's version. That lesson stayed with them. But there was one more conversation waiting. The person who had been talking about you reached out again. Your soulmate saw the message. For a moment, they considered ignoring it. Then they answered. The conversation began calmly. The person tried to explain their actions. They talked about fear. They said they thought they were protecting your soulmate from disappointment. They insisted they never intended to cause serious damage. Your soulmate listened. Then asked, "Did you ever think about what this was doing to them?" The person didn't answer. Your soulmate continued. "You were trying to protect me from being hurt, but you never stopped to think about how your actions might hurt someone else." That finally changed the tone. The person admitted they had been jealous. They admitted they had struggled with the possibility of your soulmate choosing someone else. They admitted that some of the warnings had been exaggerated. Not every detail had been fabricated. But the way those details were presented had been unfair. Your soulmate finally understood. The situation had been built from real moments mixed with personal assumptions. And that combination had been powerful enough to create months of confusion. Your soulmate didn't insult them. They didn't try to punish them. They simply said, "I understand that you were afraid." Then came the sentence that closed the door. "But your fear doesn't give you the right to decide what I believe about someone." The conversation ended there. Your soulmate put the phone down. And for the first time, there was peace. Not because everything was suddenly perfect. Because there was nothing left to investigate. The mystery had an answer. The rumors had a source. The misunderstanding had been exposed. And most importantly, you and your soulmate finally knew what the other person had actually been feeling. That changed the connection between you. Not instantly. But gradually. The conversations became more natural. There was less guessing. Less overthinking. More honesty. When something felt strange, one of you asked. When something hurt, it was discussed instead of hidden. The silence that once created distance became less powerful. And your soulmate noticed something else. You weren't trying to punish them for what happened. You weren't constantly reminding them of their mistakes. You simply wanted to know whether their actions would match their words. They understood. So they stopped making dramatic promises. Instead, they showed consistency. They checked in. They followed through. They became willing to have difficult conversations. And slowly, you began seeing a different side of them. Not a perfect person. A more honest one. One evening, your soulmate said something that stayed with you. "I used to think I needed certainty before I could trust you." You asked, "And now?" They smiled. "Now I think trust is part of how you find certainty." That was the real change. They had stopped demanding guarantees. They had started choosing communication. And perhaps that's the part of this story that matters most. If someone has misunderstood you, their misunderstanding doesn't become your identity. If someone has talked about you unfairly, you don't have to spend every day proving your worth. And if someone you care about has believed the wrong story, the healthiest answer isn't always revenge. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it's simply allowing the truth to speak for itself. Your soulmate eventually apologized again. This time, you didn't need a long explanation. You had heard enough. You knew what happened. And more importantly, you could see what they were doing differently now. They weren't asking you to trust them immediately. They were giving you reasons to. That distinction mattered. Then came the final confession. The one your soulmate had been carrying since the very beginning. They said, "When I heard people talking about you, I wasn't only afraid that they were right. You waited. I was afraid that you mattered more to me than I was willing to admit." There it was. The feeling beneath all the confusion. The reason every rumor had affected them so deeply. The reason they couldn't simply forget about you. The reason your silence bothered them. The reason seeing you move forward made them uncomfortable. You mattered. More than they had wanted to admit. And because that feeling made them vulnerable, they tried to protect themselves. But protection became distance. Distance became misunderstanding. And misunderstanding almost cost them something important. Your soulmate looked at you. Then said, "I don't know exactly where this goes." There was no dramatic promise after that. Just another honest sentence. "But I don't want fear making the decision anymore." That was enough. Because the story had never really been about a perfect ending. It had been about two people finally getting the chance to hear each other without someone else standing between them. Maybe your own situation looks nothing like this. Maybe there is no hidden person. Maybe the distance you're experiencing has another explanation entirely. That's important to remember. Don't treat a story like proof of what another person secretly thinks. Don't let a dramatic message replace real communication. If someone matters to you, ask them. If something feels wrong, talk about it. If someone has crossed a boundary, protect your peace. And if you discover that someone has been spreading an unfair story about you, remember that you don't have to become cruel just because someone else was. Your character is not decided by gossip. Your worth doesn't decrease because someone misunderstood you. And the people who genuinely care about knowing you will eventually look beyond the noise. Your soulmate learned that lesson the hard way. They learned that fear can sound convincing. They learned that confidence isn't proof. They learned that silence can create stories that were never true. And most importantly, they learned that when someone matters, communication is worth more than assumptions. If this story connected with something you've experienced, write "truth" in the comments. Not because a comment can predict what another person will do. Not because it guarantees that someone will return. Simply because sometimes putting a feeling into words helps you recognize what you've been carrying. And if you're waiting for clarity from someone, don't let the waiting consume you. Keep living. Keep growing. Keep your boundaries. Keep your heart open without abandoning your judgment. The right conversation can reveal a lot. But your peace should never depend entirely on someone else's decision. Your soulmate eventually understood that too. They stopped chasing certainty. They started choosing honesty. They stopped listening to every outside opinion. They started listening to the person actually involved. And when they finally looked at you without the rumors, without the assumptions, without the fear, they realized something simple. You had not changed nearly as much as they thought. The story had changed. Their perception had changed. Their fear had changed. But you had been yourself all along. And perhaps that is the most important truth in this entire story. People can talk. People can misunderstand. People can make assumptions. But none of that gives them the authority to define you. The truth belongs where it always belonged. Between the people who are actually living the story. And this time, your soulmate finally chose to hear it from you.